It's great to be with everyone. And what a better acronym than fun. I drove like a bat out of hell to get home so I could have some fun with all of you. And I really think it's important that actually we take a moment to think about the joy of solidarity and workers coming together and having fun together. And it's always a pleasure to be on a call with Professor Joe McCartin, who actually did a lot to teach me. When I first got involved, I didn't know anything about unions. This was 28 years ago. I became a union flight attendant. And of course, the company organized me, not giving me my first paycheck, which got me involved because, you know, if you don't get your pay, that's kind of fundamental to why you go to work. And because of that, I got involved, and I learned very early on that I had a union that had been formed by women, built up by women, always run by women, but also that we had gone out on a secondary sympathy strike with the pilots in 1985 after the rest of the country faced the firing of the air traffic controllers in 1981. After the rest of the labor movement felt that they didn't need to stand up for the air traffic controllers, who were fighting for, among other things, a 32-hour work week that we're still not achieving today, and we're going backwards and talking about overtime. But that was a moment in 1981 when the President of the United States told the rest of the country that it was open season on labor unions, that this was the opportunity to draw labor unions into fights that they couldn't win, to ship jobs overseas, to make strike a dirty word, and also on the backs of a period of time where workers had really fought like hell, lost their lives, gone through incredible violence to build up their unions and to build up the labor laws that today are under attack, that frankly were written for the corporations because they were on the backs of mass strikes and instability for corporations in an economy that is built by capitalism. And I want to be very clear that we are in this time now where people are talking about whether or not we're losing our democracy. The next generation is thinking, what is the point of democracy? What has that done to make my parents' lives better, to make the path that I have better in my life? And this next generation is saying, that hasn't done anything for me, but what is popular is unions. And unions are popular because Karen Lewis of the Chicago Teachers Union in 2012 was willing to say the word strike again and engage the community like Mother Jones had done almost a century earlier in fighting child labor laws and fighting for the rights of the minors, and helping workers understand which side we're on, that there is actually a corporate elite class and there is the working class. And the rest of us who make the world turn, whether we're federal sector workers, public sector workers, or private sector workers, we all count on each other to make our lives work and to make anything work. I often will tell people that you know, these centibillionaires who are building rockets to go to the Mars or go to the moon or go somewhere else other than the Earth that they have set afire, leaving the rest of us to burn on it, that there are flight attendants on those rockets who are calling us about joining a union. And the fact of the matter is that if it were not for the ingenuity and creativity and a skill and ability of the working class, those rockets would not be made. Nothing would turn if it were not for all of us. Now, I know that you wanted to hear about the government shutdown in late 2018 going into 2019, and what we were thinking about then. And what I was thinking about is what I had learned actually by reading Professor McCartin's book, Collision Course, that this was a real moment for the labor movement that we didn't identify as a moment for all of us. It didn't matter that the air traffic controllers that PATCO had endorsed President Reagan. It didn't matter. This was a moment when all of aviation labor should have stood up and said, if you're firing the air traffic controllers, none of us are going to work, because an injury to one is an injury to all. And so when that government shutdown came around in 2018 and into 19, and we understand as flight attendants that if government workers can't do their job, we're not safe. We can't do ours either. And I'm sorry, I'm getting a little choked up because it was real. It was very, very real that this was a moment that was a humanitarian crisis. And it was also a moment for us to realize that we could have some kind of redemption from what we had failed to do in 1981, and to show that the working class was going to stand together, was going to follow the lead of Karen Lewis for the Chicago Teachers Union, who said that we could say the word strike again, that we could engage our community in the idea that standing up for workers is going to stand up for our communities, is going to make our communities better. It was echoing the call from Bernie Sanders saying, not me, us, that we actually can't do anything if we can't count on each other. And so we set about defining what the real dangers were in our jobs, and also what the real dangers were for the traveling public, and the inconvenience for the private sector or the private flights that couldn't go if the air traffic controllers couldn't do their work either. And the poor billionaires couldn't get on their private jets and get the air traffic controllers to tell them how to get from wherever they were coming from to Atlanta to go to the Super Bowl. Everyone was going to be affected by this. And defining that and understanding that we could define that together, define the real problem, set our demands, open the government, and back up what we were demanding with what we were willing to do. There was no political solution. The political solution was the same solution that had been voted for by the Republicans before the change in congressional control that year. And they would not vote for the same thing that they had voted for just 3 weeks earlier. There was no political solution here. What Trump was trying to do was to achieve what the GOP had been trying to achieve for 50 years, was to privatize everything, to put every facet of the government into the hands of private profiteers who could profit off of our misfortune, who could lower standards to the lowest possible standards just to make an additional buck in their own pockets. That's capitalism. That's how disgusting and fundamental it is. It's only about profits. It's never about humanity. And when we really understood that racist fear-mongering about the southern border wall was nothing more than a distraction, I talk about this a lot, the 4 Ds of union busting: divide, delay, distract, and demoralize. And that is what Trump was setting out to do. We did not ever say his name. We refused to say his name. We called out Leader McConnell and said, you can fix this today. We talked about the dangers of not having federal employees either at work, supporting those who were forced to come to work without pay, or we talked about the people who were under stress of not getting a paycheck. And what could be more stressful for an air traffic controller who has to retire at age 56 because it's such a stressful job. And if they miss just one thing in their job, it can be a massive collision, a massive catastrophe and loss of life. In any other job, if you're doing 99.9% of your job correctly, you're probably going to get an award and maybe a bonus, but not in this case. And so we had to define that very clearly, what the problem was, and set out our demands, and add what we were willing to do to fight against it. And the flight attendants were willing to go on a safety strike in order to stop this. And then add urgency to what was happening. Of course it was urgent because people needed to travel. They needed to travel for medical treatment. They needed to travel because their family was in trouble or mourning, or for whatever reason that people use planes to get around. We were able to talk about why this was affecting the general public. And that's what we need to think about. We cannot focus on Trump. Trump wants us to focus on Trump. That has been his play from the beginning of time. And we cannot focus on that. What we have to do is focus on average, everyday people. Define what we need. Define what happens when our jobs are disrupted and we're not able to do them. and understand that we need to listen to each other, hear that, and then hear and think about how that reflects on each one of us. And so we can do that, but we can also do it with the spirit of solidarity, understanding that we made a big fucking mistake in 1981. And that big fucking mistake was not understanding that that attack on those air traffic controllers was an attack on every single one of us. And every day since then, working people have been denied the right to join a union, denied the right to think that it's better if you join collectively. The idea that you can pick yourself up by your bootstraps and, get along in this country and do better is a myth, an absolute myth, designed by the capitalists to have us distracted from the work that we need to do together and the solidarity that we need to build together to make good on the promise of America, which is a country that is built of, by, and for the people. And I think about every single morning when I sat in that kindergarten classroom, Miss Muldoon's classroom, looking up at that flag with my hand pressed over my heart, and the other 5-year-olds who were saying the Pledge of Allegiance with me to that flag, ending that pledge with liberty and justice for all. And I have yet to see that actually be realized in this country, but that to me was a solemn promise that we were making to each other, those little 5-year-olds in that classroom, in that kindergarten classroom. And I think that that is a promise that we can make to each other tonight. And we have to understand that Donald Trump is a master manipulator. He's probably the best union buster that there's ever been, using those 4Ds because he has very little concern over the risk to himself. To him, he has learned that to press forward on these ideas is the best way forward. That's why we cannot focus on him. We have to focus on the jobs that we have to do and how it affects other people and how we can connect to other people. That's where our focus needs to stay. That's why I'm here with all of you tonight, because I know that it's actually very easy to fight this dude. We've done it before, and we did it by not focusing on him for even a second, but focusing on all the people who need our focus on them, who need our focus on what we're doing, what you do in your job, talking about that, talking about the difference that makes, talking about the holes that you plug every single day to make society work. That is critically important. That is important for people to know. That is important knowledge to give to people. Don't underestimate the value of sharing that with each other. And then don't underestimate the value of sharing with each other why you come to that job to do that every day. Even if it's not because you love what you do, but because it actually gives you a paycheck that allows you to keep a roof over your head, to keep a roof over your family's head, to be able to care for aging parents, to be able to care for children that you're responsible for, to be able to care as an aunt or an uncle with people who look to you for leadership and look to you for how to live their own lives. These are real human beings who make up what our country is. And that's what we have to keep our focus on. Don't think for a second that by focusing on that dude with the orange hair and the really bad, very strange orange complexion has anything to do with who we are. If we focus on him, we have lost already. That is a distraction. That is, one of those 4Ds. We have to focus on each other. We have to focus on our solidarity with each other. We have to lift up each other's stories. We have to determine what the problems are, what our demands are to fix them, what we're willing to do together to back up those demands, and we have to be urgent about it. So I drove urgently home from a meeting I had. I'm still wearing my coat, actually, with my scarf on, talking to all of you, because it was important to me to be here with you tonight. And I just want you to know that I'm with you every step of the way. We know the first assault is going to come at federal workers. But if you know that you're not alone, that there are a lot of people who count on you, count on the work that you do, who want to hear what it is that you do and how it matters in their own lives, we can actually organize and defeat any attempts to try to undermine our work, our lives and actually build something better. So happy to be with you tonight. And that's what I have to share. If there's anything else you wanted me to share, let me know.
That was great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I don't think we have any other questions, but we do appreciate you taking the time, and we really appreciate your solidarity. It is not taken for granted by us here on this call. It's very important, so we appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Jacob, thank you. Lauren, thank you.
Thank you,
And
Sarah.
I want to hear a lot more from all of you. I'm going to get back to organizing over 28,000 Delta flight attendants who are trying to get to an election by the end of January. So appreciate your solidarity on that effort too. And to my good friend and incredible mentor, Professor Joseph McCartin, hello to you. Have a good night. Hope everyone has a great meeting. Solidarity forever, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Solidarity forever. Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. So everybody, and yeah, to what Sarah was saying, it's hard to say it better myself, but really the point of it is like these discussions, it's not about big government or small government, it's about good government. And the only way to get that is through strong fighting federal sector unions and our solidarity with everyone else in the private sector and every other working person like in the United States and really across the world. That's how we win that, and we have clear marching orders going forward. And so now, we're going to be talking to some panelists tonight who are going to talk about how they're doing that in their unions, and sharing some stories of victories and how they've overcome some obstacles in the past and how they're rolling the union on. So with that, I'm going to introduce, we've got Anthony Lee, Paul Osadebe, and we also have Mark, Thomas, and Emilya joining us tonight. So I'll pass it over to you to introduce yourselves and tell us what union you're with. And so we'll start it off with Anthony Lee.
Thanks, Lauren, and good evening, everyone. My name is Anthony Lee. I am chapter president for NTEU, which is the National Treasury Employees Union, Chapter 282. We represent employees at the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, who work in Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, and Washington, D.C. I'm excited to be here tonight to see everyone coming together because we really need this now more than ever.
Thanks. And Paul, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, I'm Paul Osadebe. I'm a trial attorney at OGC Fair Housing, so Office of General Counsel, Fair Housing Enforcement. Basically, we do civil rights stuff. And I'm also a steward with AFGE Local 476. And we represent people in DC, both at the headquarters and field office, and also the LA Enforcement Center. And I'm just really glad to be part of this because I get to see people coming together to act collectively and protect ourselves as federal workers, protect our agencies, and protect the public from what could be coming in the next 4 years. So I'll pass it on to whoever's ready to go next.
Yeah, how about you, Mark?
Hey everybody, my name is Mark Smith. I am the president of National Federation of Federal Employees Local 1 at the VA healthcare system in San Francisco. We represent healthcare workers from the VA Medical Center in San Francisco and clinics in Oakland, all the way up to just about the Oregon border. So some of those more rural clinics as well. I'm an occupational therapist by training, working in veterans mental health and rehab. And I'm looking forward to building solidarity and connections with y'all and seeing how we can defend public services and keep them going.
Thanks, Mark. And Thomas.
Yeah, I'm Thomas Topi. I'm an economist with the Army Corps of Engineers, and I'm the president of IFPTE Local 97, representing our Army Corps of Engineers employees in my office. And I'm also the chair of IFPTE's National Council of Army Corps of Engineers Locals, which includes about a dozen or so Corps of Engineers offices that are represented by various IFPTE locals. I've been in this position for about 3 years, and when I got started, it was a situation where my local was not that active, and there'd been a couple of retirements, and I found myself just the only person who wouldn't say no to being president. And I found this network of people to be tremendously helpful in answering my questions and helping me and my local get up to the point where we have that level of competence and we feel like we're ready for whatever may come. And I hope that can be this can be a resource for everybody who's looking for that sort of thing. And I just, the folks here are very dedicated to your cause as well, and have that sense of solidarity. So glad to be here.
Great. Thanks, Thomas. And Emilya, go for it.
Hi, I'm Emilya. I work at the National Institutes of Health, and we are with UAW. We're Local 2750. We represent about 5,000 early career researchers across 4 different states, especially Maryland. And we're doing the life-saving research of, identifying new vaccines and cures for cancer and rare diseases. And it's important not just for the American people, but people worldwide. And we're really excited to be a part of the Fund Network because, our research is extremely important. And I think there's a lot of political interference that's being claimed to be done to science. And not only to science, but our livelihoods, our safety, our security as human beings and as workers. And we're really excited to share the resources that we've learned through taking collective action and learning from all of the great people here and everything that they've accomplished and how we can fight together, as workers. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And in addition to the 5 panelists we also have our special guest panelist, Joe McCartin, with us tonight. Welcome, Joe. So Joe McCartin is a professor of history, focusing on U.S. labor, social, and political history at Georgetown Law. He is the author of more than 130 publications, including his books, Labor's Great War, The Struggle for Industrial Democracy, and the Origins of Modern American Labor Relations, and his book that we've already touched on tonight, Collision Course, Ronald Reagan, the Air Traffic Controllers, and the Strike That Changed America, which examined the origins and implications of that 1981 PATCO strike of air traffic controllers. So in addition to his writings and teachings, he is also the founding executive director of Georgetown's Kalmanovitz Initiative for Labor and the Working Poor. That initiative is a leading labor research, education, training, and innovation center that develops strategies to improve workers' lives and strengthen their voices at work, including such initiatives as bargaining for the common good. So if you've attended a Labor Notes event, you know all about that and the great work that's come out of that initiative. So again, welcome, Joe. Thank you so much for joining tonight's discussion. And just want to know, tell us a little bit about what brings you here tonight.
Well, thank you so much, Lauren. It's really such a real honor to be part of this panel tonight. I've followed federal labor relations for a long time. I've written about them, as you know. But this is one of the most exciting developments I've seen in my time studying the federal sector. That is a group of unionists from across multiple unions and around the nation coming together to strategize and to build something. And we haven't really seen something like that in my time studying this. And it's just a real honor to be with you and to share whatever I can about what we can learn from history to make sure your efforts are successful.
Thanks. And yeah, we've definitely used your book as a guidebook, and we have so much gratitude for the knowledge you imparted. And, we're doing our best to take those lessons and apply them in our workplaces. So, but just to kind of get things started, just for the question of, we know that many experienced union officers and stewards are familiar with the PATCO strike in 1981. But one thing that's very exciting about tonight's call is that most of these attendees here are new to the labor movement, including myself. I've only been part of the labor movement for the past few years. And I was wondering if you could maybe provide a brief introduction to that PATCO strike in 1981 and tell us how the outcome of that strike may have been impacted by the air traffic controllers' approach to that broader federal sector and the airline industry, and how that played out.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And Sara gave a good sort of general overview, but let me dig in and add a little bit to it. And I'll be brief. I've written a long book about it. I'm happy to talk at greater length at some time. But what I'll say is this, for those who don't know about the strike. It happened in 1981. It was a strike of federal air traffic controllers who work for the FAA. They had a union called PATCO, the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organizations. What led them to strike was a long history of really frustrating bargaining with the FAA over a long time. That's something I'm sure many of you could relate to with your own agencies. What they came to believe by 1980 and 81, however, was that they were at a potential turning point in federal labor relations. They wanted to bargain over their pay, which, as you know, in the federal sector is not really allowed. But they believed a circumstance emerged that would allow that. They actually endorsed Ronald Reagan when he challenged Jimmy Carter in 1980. He won. They believed that would give them entree. And there were certain things that the Reagan administration did that sort of led them to believe that they might actually really break the barrier and redefine collective bargaining in the federal sector. When they got disappointed again in their negotiations in 1981, they decided to go on strike. And that became one of the most important labor conflicts in federal sector history, but also over the past 100 years of the American labor movement in general. It was a devastating loss, as Sara refers to. Over 11,500 strikers were fired and permanently replaced. Now, they didn't believe that was possible when they went out on strike. They thought that if at least 75% of them went out, they would win, that there's no way the government could operate the air traffic system without them. But in fact, they discovered that the federal government has all kinds of resources prepared to do almost anything to break them, and did. And as Sara alluded to, part of that was because they found themselves out alone. They were fighting the federal government without other unions standing with them and behind them, and that was part of the problem. I would say they made three big mistakes. One is they made it an all or nothing conflict. And so either they were going to win big or they were going to lose. Either Reagan was going to, back down, or Reagan was going to win. Number two, they thought they could do this by themselves. As Sara's right, other unions didn't stand up with them, but that's partly because PATCO never really reached out to them, never built solidarity, didn't even reach out to other federal sector unions, as well as private sector unions. And so PATCO kind of made it easy for other unions to walk away when they were in the pinch. And the third thing is that they never made their fight about the common good. And it was good to hear at the outset Jake talking about the public good, the common good. Now, you as federal workers, really, you are the people who make the important agencies of our government work, as was said. You protect the public. You make our life possible in this civilized society. They never really portrayed their strike as one that the public should support. They thought simply, if we shut it down, we can win. And I think those three lessons, don't make your fight all or nothing on one thing. Don't do it alone. You have to work together. That's what makes me so excited about what you're doing here. And make your fight about the common good. Those are strategies that are absolutely essential, because PATCO didn't do that. We suffered a devastating loss that affected not only the federal service, it contributed even down to the present day, the kind of situations you all find yourself in, but also the larger labor movement in this country that for years could not engage in strikes effectively, because once Reagan did that, so many private sector employers decided we're going to imitate it. We're going to break strikes just as Reagan did. It was a devastating loss. We're at a turning point now, I think, similar to that. And it requires being thoughtful what I hear from all of you is a great deal of thought, being strategic as you are being, and building solidarity, as Sara talked about. Those are the key elements, and it's what makes me so excited to be with you.
Thanks, Joe. And just one quick follow-up question about, yeah, your area studying the book, specifically about, the book is titled Collision Course, and it kind of refers to that trajectory between like the social movements, two social movements like destined to collide, like one being that modern conservative movement championed by Ronald Reagan, and the other, the public sector labor movement, and how, they kind of collided in that 1981 strike. And just talking about it in the present day, after all this time, more than 40 years later, it looks like we're shaping up to have another collision again. And I just want to know, how would you assess in the present day the readiness of both the labor movement, not just in the federal sector, but the broader labor movement and this conservative movement for the showdown ahead? Like, what do you think is your take on it?
Well, it's a great question, Lauren, and I would say that this moment does seem to be shaping up for another collision. Project 2025 has outlined what they intend for the federal sector. And by the way, one of the co-authors of that particular chapter in Project 2025 was named Donald Devine. He was the OPM director under Ronald Reagan. So there's even continuity from that period to the present. And I believe, as Sara said earlier, that federal workers are going to be encountering the tip of the spear of this new Trump administration's efforts against labor. You are, the people I think they want to first take on. And so to be ready is crucial. And I would say that, they are very ready on their side. Project 2025 shows that they have a plan, a battle plan that they have been preparing for some time. His appointees show he's ready to fight. He wants to, change government. He wants to weaken the kinds of presence that you all have defending government's independence. So they're ready. I don't think we're as ready as we need to be. But that's why I feel like this meeting is so very, very important. Now, there are people around the labor movement who are starting to realize the kind of situation we're in. Our brother, Bill Fletcher Jr. is on this call, and he's been part of trying to get people ready for the fights that are ahead. I think that your meeting tonight is one of the most hopeful things I've seen, in the past couple of months. And I think more power to you. This is exactly what needs to happen, and I'm ready and willing to help you in whatever way I can.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate that. And to your point, talking about not making these struggles all or nothing, tying it to the public good, and building the solidarity and building a real fighting labor movement in the federal sector. And that's something at FUND that we have a particular emphasis on, about that rank and file, militant unionism that we need to, not just rely on our leaders and our, skilled labor lawyers and lobbyists. We can't rely on that servicing model, because we know it fails, and the real power is in democratic unionism. And that's something that we are trying to build within our own unions. Again, that's not to say that those things don't have a place, but really where the power comes from is the people and the workers, and connecting that to the broader, broader communities, and getting them involved. And so, just kind of want to then pass it over to Thomas, because we've talked about those theories of change and how do we incorporate those principles into our workplaces, and just wanted to kind of pass it over to you and talk about how do you think we can solve some of those organizing problems that we face in our workplaces and in the broader federal sector.
Yeah, so I think like a lot of us, I've read The Secrets of a Successful Organizer, and there's one particular part of it that kind of sticks with me. and that, well, many parts, but one part in particular that I've been thinking of lately, and that's when you have some sort of campaign or some sort of demand, like defining what it is you want, then who among the management structure has the power to say yes to your demand, and what's the cost of them saying yes to your demand, and then how can you raise the cost of them saying no. And I think we're all pretty worried about various threats that could come in the coming months and years. But I think it's important to realize that all of these threats, they're going to require dozens or hundreds or even thousands of people to realize the threats and or to make those threats come about in the way that we might be worried about. And with any big group of people like that, there's some weak part in the plan. There's going to be somebody who's not as enthused as the others about making these awful things that we keep hearing about come to pass. If it's something that requires legislation, there are going to be some members of Congress who maybe they come from a purple district and they want to stay popular. Maybe they come from a district that represents a lot of government employees that they don't want to upset. There's going to be somebody whose incentives are different from the others. And then that works all the way down to the local level when we're dealing with supervisors and our management structure in our own offices. Whatever the policies may be, agency-wide or government-wide, a lot of supervisors probably just want to live their life without too much drama, and they don't want everybody in their office to hate them. And so to the extent that there's gray area that they're given, like how can we push them toward the most employee worker friendly end of that spectrum? The ideas are gonna come to each of us depending on the specific situation, but to whatever extent you can rally your fellow workers together in solidarity and push on those pressure points, it'll make it that much more likely that we'll see the types of outcomes that we're looking for.
That's a great framework, Thomas, for, thinking about any problem that we have, like you said, big or small, local or national problems. I think trying to, like I said at the top, what we want to really do is give people a framework for going out and solving their own problems, because we have 200 people on the call. We're not going to be able to answer 200 questions. And I'm presumably every person has multiple questions, right? But we hope that we're able to kind of drill in our emphasis on rank and file engagement and power and things like that. And so with the backdrop of the panel so far, having talked about the history and having talked about how we are kind of thinking about these problems, we're going to move on to some of the explicit threats. And I think probably the number one concern among federal employees right now is our jobs. There are all sorts of threats out there to cut the federal employee headcount by 50, 60, 75%. And I don't think that, I don't know how many people think that actually cutting 50% of the headcount is a serious threat, but verbalizing that as a threat means that they're serious about taking an axe to our jobs without regard for how it will affect us and the public. So we need to be prepared to fight. And while I'm not sure that we've seen threats vocalized on that level before, federal workers are not strangers to job cuts, right? We have seen people try to attack our jobs. We have seen people try to cut the headcounts at federal agencies willy-nilly before. And in fact, in 2022, under the Biden administration, the Department of Veterans Affairs proposed closing 17 medical centers and 174 outpatient clinics. Our unions stopped that. So, Mark, can you talk to us a little bit about how that happened and, maybe what lessons we can learn from our union's successful fights against the VA's proposed job cutting measures?
You bet. Thanks, Jake. So this was secondary to legislation that was passed actually under the Trump administration in 2018, something called the Mission Act, which sort of opened the door to increased privatization and outsourcing of veterans healthcare. But it actually really didn't sort of come to a fruition or to a head until 2022 or 2021 under the Biden-appointed VA Secretary Dennis McDonough, when they were basically recommending this, this closure of hundreds of VA facilities across the country under this thing called the Asset and Infrastructure Review Commission. It would have led to job loss for thousands of VA employees, and obviously lack of access to healthcare for many veterans. And also, a lot of people don't know this, but the VA has 4 missions. The first one only being what everyone knows is providing veterans healthcare, but the other 2 being, training the next generation of healthcare professionals. The VA trains over 70% of U.S. physicians get some training at the VA. It provides, precepting sites and training sites for nurses, thousands of nurses across the country, who then go into, other healthcare systems. It also does a lot of research that benefits all Americans, not just veterans. And then it also, we realized this during COVID, but it has a 4th mission, which is as an emergency backup to our country's healthcare systems, right? So we saw, non-veterans being treated for COVID in New York during the pandemic, things like this. So the VA is really, a public good. It also provides a model of what publicly funded healthcare could look like. A lot of people don't always make that connection, but we talk to Medicare for All advocates a lot that, hey, the VA is, you don't have to look to Switzerland, you don't have to look to Canada, or even Britain. You've got a great example of publicly funded healthcare here right in your backyard. So during that fight, obviously, our federal unions, AFGE, my union NFFE, the National Nurses United, and NAGE, there was a launch of a nationwide Save My VA campaign, and this mobilized, hundreds of union members across the country to, have rallies at their local facilities, in coalition with veterans groups, community advocates, engaging in a lot of grassroots lobbying of lawmakers, submitting op-eds, just sort of grassroots, all across the country. And if I don't have a lot of time, there's a lot of folks on this call who could probably speak to that time as well. But I will say just a couple of things. Eventually it did lead to the creation of a political crisis, and that air commission was stopped. The VA facility closures were stopped by a bipartisan group of senators. And then it also led to the Permanent Save Our VA Coalition. That is a coalition between VA unions, the Veterans Healthcare Policy Institute, Veterans for Peace, in trying to stop the ongoing attempts to privatize the VA, because they don't stop. But a couple of things that some of our panelists already have mentioned were really, I think, instrumental in that fight, which is, at the local level, one of the things that a lot of local leaders found was that, our workers are community members. Many of them are veterans themselves. Many of them are members of, community organizations and institutions. And by activating members' community connections, right, this could really amplify our voice. And so that was something that a lot of locals did, right? They reached out to their members, say, who's a veteran, what veterans groups, what veteran membership organizations are you part of? Can you get those organizations involved in this fight, right? Or is your, what church or what mosque or what synagogue are you part of? Can you, get those folks involved in this fight, right? So really reaching out to our members and activating those already existing community networks that they are part of was really, I think, instrumental in really letting lawmakers know that they were going to have a problem if they tried to actually, go through with this. And yeah, so that was one of the main factors. And then another factor, I think, was just, a lot of federal workers had never done things like an informational picket, right? Or holding a rally at their facility. That was just not something a lot of federal workers had done or were used to doing. And so it was just a lot of education at the local level, right? What are my rights as a federal employee? Can I go out and host a rally in front of the facility? how do I do that? Sharing examples of other folks doing it, NNU, sharing examples from NNU doing this at VA facilities really emboldened, folks at our facility, right, to be able to follow that model and take action. So really providing that education and examples of similar folks taking action was really, I think, instrumental in helping mobilize those local responses all across the country.
All right, thanks for that, Mark. Another one of the other big threats that we've been seeing from the people coming into the Trump administration, from people who don't know anything about federal government, frankly, is trying to attack our telework. My own union, AFGE, I was just complimenting their comms department in the chat. But AFGE has, in my opinion, done a really excellent job of combating some of these lies. Like, for example, the lie that only 6% of federal workers come in to the office. If like I was talking about this over the holidays at a Christmas party with with some of my family that had bought into this, and it's like, if you hear that number and you're not immediately like, oh, well, that sounds weird, then you just, you've totally bought into something that's not true. Thinking about what federal workers do. I mean, the VA, federal firefighters, people who work at the commissaries on military installations, people who do research and lab work at the National Institutes of Health. Like, there are 54% of all federal jobs are completely ineligible for telework. And even then, of the people who are eligible for telework, 61% of those hours are done in the office. But unfortunately, just correcting these lies is not going to be sufficient to fight back against these attacks. Telework is a really important quality of life issue for people who can do telework, and it's frankly a really important tool for management to have in recruiting and retaining talent. If we're not able to offer the same things that similar jobs in the private sector are offering, it's going to be that much more difficult to recruit and retain talent. And so, AFGE does have a whole telework fact sheet that I would encourage people to check out. But like I said, just knowing the truth is not going to be able to stop these attacks. And we're going to have other weapons. One of those being our contracts, our union contracts that hopefully most of us have been trying to get ratified or get extended, like the Social Security Administration. Paul, AFGE is the union that represents most union Social Security workers, and they have recently been able to extend their telework agreement through 2029. Can you talk to us about that and, lessons for protecting telework for federal employees?
Sure. So this was especially important at the Social Security Administration because they were already having a lot of problems with retention, with happiness of workers on the job, and they really needed to keep what they already had in terms of telework to keep staff levels up and to keep employees engaged. And it's important to realize that when we have collective bargaining agreements, those are something that can help protect us against changes in administrations, because something a lot of people don't know is that existing agreements actually trump executive orders. So they might not protect us from changes in laws or government-wide regulations, but if hypothetically there was a change in administrations and the next president was hostile towards telework, if you have an existing agreement that says we have this amount of telework and it can't be taken away, that's a really good protection against just attacks on workers and trying to make them unhappy with their work, trying to make them quit, because they've openly stated that's part of the reason that they want to get rid of telework. They want to make the working conditions worse and to kind of break the effectiveness of government so that many of us will not want to put up with it anymore. We'll just lead to the private sector, we'll become contractors. We just won't want to put up with it anymore. And so the Social Security Administration, through a coalition of various unions, it wasn't just one union by themselves, it was AFGE, NTEU, NFFE, all these unions came together and said, hey, we need to figure out a way to keep telework. And they knew that if they locked it in now and had a long enough term, they could protect that telework all the way through the next 4 years. And that's exactly what they did at the Social Security Administration. They went to the negotiating table and they explained how important it was to employees to have telework, to have that flexibility, and to have that bargaining chip as compared to the private sector. Because if you have well-qualified employees and they feel that they're losing rights or they don't have the same flexibility as people in the private sector, a lot of those people will just leave. And then the agency isn't as effective. So you don't have to phrase it as something that's just a benefit to workers just because they want it. It's for the mission of the agency. And that's something to always keep in mind. The same laws that give federal workers the right to unionize explicitly say that unionization in the federal workplace and worker input in the federal workplace is essential to having an efficient government. Like any executive order or regulation we're going to see in the next 4 years, that's always going to be the justification. It's about efficiency. We're just trying to have an efficient government. But Congress has already said our input is what makes the government efficient. You can't have an efficient government without us being a part of it. So in the next 4 years, before the inauguration, you should be going to your locals and trying to figure out, what are we doing to get current contracts extended? What are we doing to make those extensions last through the next administration? And that's something you're going to need to potentially take actions that you're not used to, informational picketing, talking to your coworkers in person or online about what steps can we take to put pressure on the negotiators, on the agency, and to get them to understand the importance of the things that we want and need. So I'll pass it back.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And like, speaking of the things we want and need, I know a lot of us, like, we just want to be able to do our jobs, and we want to be able to serve the American people, and we want to be able to do it without like interference, whether it's, talking about this like political interference, especially with a lot of us. For me personally, as an employee with the Bureau of Land and Management New Mexico, which the BLM manages over like 245 million acres of federal lands, and 30% of the mineral deposits in the subsurface in the United States. A lot of we are the major oil and gas, onshore oil and gas leasing and drilling agency. And because of us having this multi-use mission, there's so many tensions in terms of protecting the science, and because we have specialists who care about our wild, rare plants, the wildlife, threatened and endangered species, our water, our air quality, the impacts to local communities, and honestly, regardless of who's sitting in the White House, we still have this political interference from managers and industry and people who don't have country's best interests at heart. And trying to address that in our contracts so that we can do our jobs and serve the American people. And I just want to pass it over to Emilya, because I know, one of the things too we do is share information about good union contracts and how can we adopt those provisions into our own during our own negotiations. And so, yeah, Emilya, I'm sorry, I mispronounced your name, but just, I know that you and your local recently secured some contract provisions similar to what AFGE and at the EPA in Chicago fought for and won in their recent contract. And maybe you want to speak about a little bit about that process and some of your lessons learned there.
Yeah, definitely. So for folks who maybe joined late, I'm Emilya, and I work at the National Institutes of Health, and we are UAW 2750. And we were extremely inspired by AFGE, Local 238 in particular, because they had that scientific integrity clause that's going to protect their scientists from retaliation for pursuing correct science that's going to help the public. And, we do a lot of things like infectious disease, and that's been under huge, bipartisan types of attacks. And, we don't want anyone to have retaliation. So we were able to win things in our contract that models different types of protections that AFGE won. You know, we talked to folks in the EPA, actually connected through the fund network to get some advice. And, you know, as a divergence from scientific integrity, we actually won, for instance, telework protections, because actually many scientists work on the computer doing large data sets analysis. And that's another example of something we won through, you know, getting advice through the fund network of just like, you know, what are resources? What, you know, what have people done? And in particular, what do you do when your agency fights back? You know, like they don't want to give you telework. They don't want to secure away rights. They don't want to secure away research integrity and making it a grievable, enforceable process. And that's where we, you know, did collective action and we spoke up together. And we had many open letters of, you know, thousands of fellows signing. We did marches on the boss. We did informational pickets. And we're really excited to have a lot of things in our collective bargaining agreement that I think are really going to help us weather not only the next administration, but any administration that comes up. And yeah, we're just really appreciative of being able to grow upon what other folks have secured in their collective bargaining agreement.
Thanks. And yeah, it's a good point of like, you know, building on those previous fights. And yeah, like building on those models. And so, yeah, just I think to address one of the other elephants in the room is just all, you know, I'm sure we've all heard about, you know, the Trump's promise to revive Schedule F, which would, you know, eliminate merit-based civil service protections for a broad swath of federal employees, including many on this call. And we know this isn't the first time that this has been done, and harmful and unlawful executive orders have been implemented. But we also know that unions have done a lot to fight back. And so I just want to get to either, Paul or, you know, Anthony, give you guys a chance to talk about, you know, kind of the experience that you've had in your chapters of how our unions have fought back against those executive orders in the past or similar ones.
Sure, I can get started. Thanks, Lauren. I guess I would just mention that we did learn a lot of lessons from the previous Trump administration in 2018. For example, we've heard a lot in the news about relocating government agencies outside of the DMV area, the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. And in 2018, the Trump administration did attempt to relocate the Food and Nutrition Service that falls under Department of Agriculture, an NTEU represented agency, and they wanted to move them, but employees standing up in small ways, just speaking up at formal meetings, talking about how it would be a lack of institutional knowledge and expertise that would be lost from moving these agencies outside of the DMV, were able, working with their union, to stop that move, or at least get it still to stay, to keep the Food and Nutrition Service, FNS, in the DMV area. They ended up moving maybe less than 10 miles from their previous location, were able to negotiate that move and get a parking allowance for employees. And that kind of showed us that when employees do stand up against policies that the Trump administration will come out with, or another administration, then they can be successful. Similarly, right this year in the Philadelphia district office, which FDA employees work out of and our chapter represents, the agency went to go move them to a very undesirable location where employees would have to incur a cost of $30 a day in parking. The location wasn't fit for employees' needs, and employees again stood up, pushed back on that, and we at least have a delay now until 2026 with push to just keep the employees where they are. The agency's talking about efficiency, cost effectiveness. Well, when we look at what they were attempting to do versus keeping the employees where they are, it would be more cost effective to allow them to stay where they are, co-located with other agencies like Customs and Border Protection, Department of Agriculture, which FDA works closely with. The FDA does regulate 60% of the U.S. economy. I don't think people realize that, from foods, drugs, medical devices, tobacco products, our food and feed pipeline. So telling that story of how we would lose institutional knowledge and expertise to help keep the public safe is part of whatever we do when we're trying to stand up on behalf of negative actions that that any administration wants to bring that would harm federal employees. So That's one thing there. I think there are a lot of lessons learned and to help get us prepared for what's to come.
Yeah, I think that, tying into, the threats that the Trump administration is going to be and has brought in the past and will be bringing again to federal workers, one of the big threats from the previous administration that we're expecting to see again is a threat to union rights generally. I think there was some attempts towards the end of the last administration to take away collective bargaining rights wholesale from workers at the DoD, which is where I've spent most of my career, and Thomas, where you're at now with the Corps of Engineers. With the threat to collective bargaining rights completely, I think that that is a really good opportunity to highlight a story out of IFPTE Local 98, where they were able to win something very, very significant without having gone through the normal contract negotiation process or the grievance process or anything like that. It was completely direct action. And frankly, just the utilization of direct action as its own tool for the purpose of achieving a goal is something that I think most unions in the federal sector we've allowed those muscles to atrophy. So can you talk about how how Local 98 in IFPTE was able to get a significant amount of advanced sick leave for a pregnant coworker?
Yeah, so there was a worker who was 8+ months pregnant and looking to take advanced sick leave to go along with her parental leave, and her supervisor told her that her request for advanced sick leave was declined because she was too mission critical. And then she appealed to her second line supervisor, who said, "Well, you have the grievance procedures in the contract. That's what you can resort to." And of course, there wasn't enough time to win a grievance to take it all the way to arbitration, but before the baby was going to be due. And it's like, what can you do in that situation where the negotiated process is there, but it's just not going to work in a timely fashion. And what they did in her local was they had a meeting over lunch and gathered a few dozen signatures saying this person should be granted her advanced sick leave. And then everybody who was in that meeting who got the signatures, they go and they talk to their fellow coworkers until it's kind of the talk among the whole office. And then very shortly there's a meeting of the supervisors. They come out of that meeting and the request for advanced sick leave is granted. So I mean that's a situation where it's collective action, not necessarily with the contract, but they're finding a way to raise that cost of the decision maker saying no. So it's kind of in that framework. We've also had another example where in the previous Trump administration, Secretary of Defense Esper signed an order saying that the child care subsidies would be taken away. And there was a pressure campaign once people figured out that this was going to go into effect, which they only figured out a couple months after it was signed. They coordinated with IFPTE at the federation level and kind of did a pressure campaign in public forums and personal appeals, and eventually Secretary of Defense Esper, the same person who signed that order, rescinded it. So you have to try, you have to coordinate with your fellow coworkers and any allies you might have, and you need to raise the cost of the decision maker saying no to you.
I think that's exactly right. And the and having a network of committed union activists that can jump into action at a moment's notice like that, it takes time. It takes a lot of diligent effort on the part of the leadership and rank and file activists in the local, and hopefully folks will stick around in the fund to talk about resources and how we can kind of do that on an ongoing basis. Another threat to collective bargaining rights, I mentioned that DOD, they might try to take away our collective bargaining rights totally. Emilya, you as a fellow at the National Institute of Health, it was not even clear that you had a right to unionize even under a friendly Biden administration. Y'all had to fight to even have the opportunity to have an election, and now you have had that election. You won by a significant amount, and your union recently announced a tentative agreement that you'll be voting on here soon. Can you talk to us about your fight just to have an election and how you were able to win?
Yeah, back in June of last year, we submitted, a majority of fellows had signed an authorization cards. We're on Title 42. We're not on the GS scale. And they tried to tell us, we don't qualify. Classic things, we're academics. They have said this in all other different universities and stuff. They've said you can't form a union. But we had, this kind of power of making ourselves unignorable. And we have been building up the structure to inform and engage folks on a dime when possible, which is very frequent, it turns out. And we had signed, this was when we did one of our first largest open letters. And within a couple of days, we got several hundred signatures. And we, it was public, but it was directed towards Javier Becerra, the director of HHS. But we knew after a time, it actually went all the way to Joe Biden. And you're trying to go up for re-election. We were able to massage those political goals with, direct action by, hundreds of workers at a critical time for something that is extremely present in the public good. And a week later, NIH said they retract their objections. They drag their feet, but we get an election, and 98.7% vote yes. People were turned away by the FLRA. We had too many people to vote. And then I'll just say one more thing in that, they also, I don't know if this is unusual to folks, but they said we would really struggle to get many things in our contract because we wanted to finish it before Trump takes office. And, we bargained for 8 months to get our first collective bargaining agreement. It's 92 pages long. We won, we didn't get everything that we fought for this first time, but we got a lot, and it is extremely strong. And the only reason that's because we took action. We did a picket when they said we couldn't negotiate. They tried to take away our healthcare during negotiations. We actually got them to negotiate over pay, but that's only possible because everybody stood up and took action together and was really motivated by raising the collective good that we have.
It's awesome. It's, they say it's if you get everything in your first contract, you didn't ask for enough. Yes. So, and for us too, as we're wrapping up our, our first contract, it's I'm telling employees, contract's not the end, it's just the beginning. We're building that momentum and building that the fight that took to get there onto implementation, onto the grievances, onto enforcing the workplace rights, and then focusing our efforts outward and building that community, building that network, building the solidarity, and connecting our fellow unionists with the fund network. And I think that's, really what we were talking about today. These are just some of the topics, right, that we discuss in the network, in the WhatsApp community, and all the different ways we can support each other, learn about best practices, what are the fighting techniques? When can we show up for each other for that picket? How can we mobilize our members, our communities to show up and stand out with our comrades in the struggle? And so, again, just a plug, if you haven't joined us already, there's been some links floating around the chat for how to join, how to get involved. And again, this is going to be one of more of these types of panel discussions coming out in the future. So again, thank you all to all the panelists. Thank you, Joe, for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us. It's been great. Appreciate
I
all of
will.
you.
I'll take the
Yeah.
liberty really quickly, Lauren,
Yeah.
before I let you wrap up. Since we do
Yeah.
have Joe as a historian, I'm interested in a final question to him, and we'll go like a couple of minutes over with this, but I think it'll be okay. Having heard from other members of the panel, folks who are, rank and file, working unionists in the federal sector, what do you think your, number one piece of advice as somebody who has been an observer of the federal labor movement and maybe, mistakes and mistakes that we have made in the past as the federal labor movement and things we've done right? What do you think your number one piece of advice would be for us and the rest of the federal labor movement going into this new administration?
That's a big question, Jake. I think what I will say though is that I just cannot emphasize how much I am encouraged by what I've just heard by the panelists here and the way that they are approaching their work in their various settings. And frankly, the fact that you have assembled here the kind of group that I can see listed in the chat. Rank and file people, also some local presidents, also some people who aren't in the union yet, who are not yet organized, but are curious. And that's exactly what you need to be doing. You need to be across the board, every union in the federal sector. You need to be reaching out to rank and file people. You need to be reaching out to unorganized federal workers. You need to talk to whatever local leadership you can get when you can get them, like people like Chris. But you also have to talk to people who might not be in leadership. They might be the leaders of tomorrow. And what I see here is the development of a spirit and a way of doing things, which is it's really solidarity in action. You're listening to each other. You are seeing in your different agencies what you have in common, and you recognize the common threat right now. And this is a threat for sure, like we have not seen, I think, at least since the Reagan era. We lived through Trump won, of course, and Sara was instrumental in the fight then, as were her members and threatening to go out, and as were air traffic controllers who called in sick to help bring about the end of that effort. But I think the fight ahead is going to be all the more challenging. And, it just strikes me that you're up to it and you're going about it the right way. I am happy to help. I know, I was just texting back and forth with Bill, and Bill was saying, he wants to help as well. There are many of us out there who want to be able to chip in and help you as we can, because this is one of the most hopeful things I see going on right now. So thank you for involving me in it.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. Means a lot. And yeah, we're even in these dark times with these high stakes, there's major gains to be won too. And that's what we're there for. We're not just gonna like keep our ground. We're gonna advance. Not only for ourselves and our workers, but for this country. So that's the goal, and we're here to do it. So I appreciate it.